Thank you very much, everybody. I'm very glad to be here speaking today. My name is Dean Hively. I'm a scientist with the U.S. Geological Survey's Eastern Geographic Science Center, and I've been working in the Chesapeake Bay region for going on 8 years now, after coming down from Cornell, where I'd done some PhD work working with the New York City watershed program. So it's been a great education over the last 8 years in terms of larger watersheds and more heavily agricultural areas. I've been working as part of a team primarily focused on Maryland. We're currently branching out into Virginia and Pennsylvania as well, but the work I'm talking to you about today has been performed in conjunction with the USDA Agricultural Research Service, the Maryland Department of Agriculture, through whom we get access to Maryland's cost share program data for winter cover crops, and working directly with the soil conservation districts as well. And so indebted to my co-authors here and the wide range of organizations who have been involved with our work, most of which is funded by National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So I have a lot of slides here for 15 minutes. I'm going to move through them fairly quickly in hopes that you'll come back and look at the data in some more detail at your leisure. So winter cover crops, keep it green, is an organic farming principle, but also has a lot of implications for soil health, for breaking disease cycles, for improving soil aggregate stability, and importantly for helping to make nutrient and sediment losses from farmland be reduced, be more sustainable within the farm recyclical system, as opposed to being lost through groundwater to the bay in terms of sediment, in terms of nitrogen, or through surface water in terms of sediment. So there are a lot of reasons to grow cover crops. What we'll be focusing on today is the primary water quality benefit, which is reduction of nutrient and sediment. Quite a variety of regional conservation programs, both federal, state, local, and voluntary, are prioritizing implementation of winter cover crops on Chesapeake Bay farmland, and it's interesting to see the differences in the strategies. I'll be talking about Maryland, where there is a quite extensive winter cover crop cost share program funded by the government. This is an example of a winter cover crop that's in pretty good shape. This is a plow-till system. You can see very little residue on this field. Flat, so there wouldn't be a lot of erosion, but definitely a good thing there's this much cover crop there to protect the soil from raindrop impact and to take up nitrogen in its biomass. The idea being, during the summer, you grow a corn or a soybean crop. In the fall, you might have leftover residual fertilizer or mineralization of organic matter from decomposing roots and such. Good to have something growing to take up that nitrogen and hold it in biomass over the winter, rather than allow it to leach out during the winter hydrologically active season. Here's another cover crop in a no-till situation where there's a lot of residue also protecting the soil, but quite a bit of biomass here in the cover crop, pretty successful. You see a lot of variability though. This looks more like a crop being grown for a wheat harvest than having a huge amount of biomass, although this will continue to grow into the spring and have a good water quality effect. Here's the same similar level of medium to low biomass under no-till situations. And here's an aerial seeded field that failed under the particular weather conditions of this year. So this field was planted to cover crops, but really no cover crop growing there in the middle of the winter. So the outcomes of cover cropping are variable. That's the take-home message. As many soils and farms and farming methods are out there can have variable effects. So we know from plenty of research I don't have the time to get into today that good consistent use of cover crops can definitely reduce loss of nitrogen out of the root zone into shallow groundwater and from there into the stream. But how much is captured and how do different agronomic practices compare? That's our research question we set out to answer. And the approach we use to address it is combining three pieces of information. Farm program data records, so we know where the farm fields are and what agronomic practices are happening. This is kept in a privacy protected environment. satellite remote sensing using imagery to look at the amount of vegetation growing on a field, and then a fair bit of on-farm sampling to make sure we're getting the interpretation correct. Our strategy is to work directly with soil conservation districts, go out and do our sampling on real farms, and look at the entire range of cover crop fields across the landscape in terms of looking at environmental outcomes. Three tools then: site-specific management practices, use of satellite imagery, and then a third geospatial data layer that's become pretty readily available now, produced by the USDA, called the National Cropland Data Layer. That's another satellite product that can be used to look at the distribution of, say, corn land and soybean land across the agricultural landscape. So I'm going to run through each one of these three and talk to you about how we combine them, and then I'll show you a little bit of data. Not having a whole lot of time to do it, but first of all, very indebted to the folks in the Talbot County Soil Conservation District, Maryland Department of Agriculture, and National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We have a complete set of digitized records for Talbot County going back now to 2007. So this isn't a random sampling of cover crops. This is every cover crop field in Talbot County. So it's a nice data set to track what's going on. This is the type of agronomic data that's available with it. This is information the farmer tells to the Soil Conservation District as they enroll in the program. You're going to see this data disclaimer all through the presentation. This is indicating that this work hasn't been peer reviewed yet. So I put these tables together to show to you today. Please don't pay too much attention to the specific numbers. If you want to really do a sophisticated analysis to get numbers for a larger interpretation, come see me and we'll make sure we get publication grade data. But this is, I'll stand by it as a draft. What do we see here? We see wheat over time, so 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12, 5 consecutive winter cover crop growing seasons. So 2008-9, the cover crop would be planted in, say, October 2008 and grow through the winter. You see acreage. This is from the Talbot records of every cover crop field. You see the acreage of wheat growing over the course of those 5 years, similarly for other species. And then you can also look at the information not based on what cover crop species, but what crop it follows. So you can see most of the cover crop going in after corn and after soybeans, and the number of fields increasing through time. So cover crop implementation is increasing in Talbot County. Here you can finally get to see Talbot County. It's the light blue outline here on the Delmarva Peninsula. In terms of imagery, we get it cost-free from USGS. We either are using Landsat images or SPOT as another satellite, a little smaller footprint and higher resolution. Some of them are cloudy, some of them are clear. You look for something mid-winter where the cover crop has had the chance to grow into the cold season and then kind of gone dormant, and looking at its biomass on the ground then in, say, early January is a way of measuring the environmental outcome of the fall growth. So pick particular images. We picked one per year to talk to you about today. Here's a farmer who's a collaborator with us, so we could show data specific to his field. Basically, the technique we're using is an old one. To the 1970s, folks have used satellites to look at ground cover biomass. What you see here is the brighter fields in red are reflecting brightly in the near-infrared, which is what growing plant tissue does. It reflects near-infrared light off the cell walls, and basically it's similar to using your eye to look at a field, and you can tell there's a lot of grass on it, except by using different wavelengths we can get better measurements. And now the data I'm showing you is privacy protected, except this farmer signed the release. So we know the digitized field boundary for every field. We know the species planted in that field. We know that this field here is a barley planted 2.5 bushels per hectare with a no-till drill on September 17th following a corn crop. So there's an awful lot of agronomic information in this data set. And we're talking about 1,500 fields per year in Talbot County. So what we've done here is, if you see the brighter red being a heavier biomass, we came up with a tool to basically threshold that and translate it into minimal, low, medium, or high biomass categories, where the fields here in the center pivot on this half was obviously planted a little earlier and has a higher biomass, whereas these are fields, that really have very little cover crop on them. This is what I'm talking about when I'm saying minimal, low, medium, high thresholds. Really pretty low biomass because it's just a grass in the early phase of its growth. High getting up to a pretty good ground cover. And I'd say medium and high would be a good water quality outcome. So this is our second tool that we're using then, a satellite image translated into greenness, which is very accurate for comparison within images. Still a little work to do to compare different dates and make sure we get the numbers exactly well aligned. Each image is a snapshot in time that can be translated to a biomass threshold. The third tool in the toolbox is this National Cropland Data Layer. Same map. Yellow was planted to corn, brown double crop soy corn, and green full season soybean. This is produced on an annual basis, wall to wall across the United States, so readily available. Pretty accurate for large fields. It gets some speckling in non-agricultural areas. So a good tool that's public that allows us to look at crop type and look at winter ground cover by crop type. So here I've taken that, everywhere that it was yellow is corn, and now I've applied my winter time greenness thresholds only to cornland. So you can see clusters of fields here following corn with high biomass, some cornfields up there that are not planted to cover crops. So interesting to look at combining the cropland data layer with our cover crop records and look at percentage of cornfields in cover crops over time, and you can see this is increasing as cover crop implementation is increasing, and then you can see less bare exposed soil as time is going by. So pretty good news here in terms of Talbot having an effective cover crop program. Then you can look into the agronomics if you like. What affects cover crop success? Planting date's a big one. Species choice is important. Planting method, previous crop, and the ever-present weather. Cover crops can also be nitrogen limited or nitrogen glut. So you can get into specific analysis of, different species, number of fields. Most people are planting wheat, and environmental outcomes. Please don't get hung up on the particular numbers here. That's why it says draft. But the trends are pretty clear. Gray here is growing degree days versus planting date. So if you plant something on this early mid cutoff date, that's the number of growing degrees you have left before December 31st. A very nice fit with all of these fields and growing degrees, that being very important, with a little bump of productivity there, possibly due to the weather or due to people doing a better job of planting it. You could translate this into a price. This is just 1 year. Please don't use these numbers. We're planning on producing these for all 7 years and then getting at something. So in conclusion, what makes a successful cover crop? Some biomass threshold above which you have enough ground cover to control soil erosion and enough nutrient uptake to make an impact. That's an easy one. There are also just cover crop systems that are working, that due to farmer innovation or good extension, rye after corn silage is a no-brainer. All of the states are really prioritizing that because corn for silage gets harvested earlier, so there's a longer fall growing season for cover crop opportunity. Barley and wheat planted after normal grains, clover after winter wheat in the northern climes. When you don't have time to do a soybean after winter wheat, you can plant clover fallow. Cover crop mix is coming on strong. So you can't think of cover crops outside of thinking about nutrient management on a farm and thinking about cropping systems in particular climates, those geomorphic regions or elevations where different species mixes might work differently. But what's succeeding? It's out there. How can we help it grow? We don't need to invent it. We need to figure out what's working. Green is good. Is greener always better? Some of the field data we have that I've appended to the end of this, you can take a look at some farm reports. if a field has 200 pounds of nitrogen on it, cover crop's going to get half of it. If the field has 10 pounds of nitrogen, cover crop's going to get half of it. That's what we're looking at, by and large, from our field sampling data. So if I'm looking at this map of biomass, and looking here, I can really tell that this is a dairy farm and they're growing rye after silage, planting it early because they're having such good success with that cover crop. But it's probably also receiving a lot of manure, and so you might think about both manure management and cover crops as a strategy for that farm. How do we define success? Successful strategies fit the site-specific area. You can think about planting dates or what have you. Economical, looking at multiple benefits, and experimenting. Carrot, sticks, knowledge, and experience. There are a lot of drivers for cover crops across the watershed. So in conclusion, if we're interested in having a discussion, I'd be really interested to hear from you, whether it's about cover crops specifically, whether it's about the farming systems that work well with cover crop strategies. How do we define success? Where do we want to be in 10 years? Do we want to define all kinds of cover crop categories to give different credibility? Or do we want to use a remote sensing to say these fields are above a threshold, let's count them in the Bay model at some level. So keep it green, feed the soil. I'm just going to skip ahead to show you there are a couple of farm reports to look at and a list of acknowledgments, so you can look at those at your leisure. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.